I never expected my life to unravel like this. At least not the way it did on that particular day. You see, when you marry someone, there's this unspoken belief that no matter what life throws at you, you're in it together. That belief shattered into a million pieces the moment my wife, Clara, demanded a divorce. Let me set the scene for you. It was a week after my father-in-law, Robert, had been laid to rest. The man was a legend, self-made, disciplined, and surprisingly kind to a fault despite his stoic exterior. He was the type who spoke more through action than words, and those actions built an empire worth millions. Now, I knew Clara had her issues with him. She always complained about how he never let her live her life. But this? I wasn't prepared for this level of betrayal. Clara stood there in the living room, arms crossed, a smug smile curling her lips. Her voice was sharp when she said it. I want a divorce. At first, I thought she was joking. I laughed. Can you believe that? I actually laughed. Come on, Clara, I said. What are you talking about? We just buried your father. Shouldn't we be talking about how we move forward together? But the look on her face told me this wasn't a joke. It wasn't even a spur-of-the-moment decision. No, this was calculated, planned, and executed with surgical precision. You're useless to me now, she said, her words cutting like a blade. I don't need you anymore. Useless? That word echoed in my mind, stinging more than I'd care to admit. Useless. After all these years of standing by her side, supporting her when she felt lost, believing in her when even she didn't believe in herself, I was useless? And then it hit me. The $379 million inheritance. She had already begun to think of herself as untouchable, invincible even. That money, she believed, was her golden ticket out of this marriage. I looked at her, trying to keep my composure. I'll admit, it wasn't easy. The anger, the betrayal, it was all boiling under the surface. But I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me lose my cool. No, if she wanted to play this game, I'd let her. All right, I said, keeping my tone light, almost amused. If that's what you want, then fine. I'll sign the papers. But just remember one thing, Clara. Don't regret this later. LOL. Yes, I said LOL. You should have seen her face. She probably thought I'd beg, cry, or try to talk her out of it. Instead, I gave her what she wanted. I signed those papers without hesitation, handed them back to her, and walked out of the house. I didn't even pack my things. What was the point? Clara had made it abundantly clear where I stood in her world. Now, I'll be honest with you. Walking away wasn't easy. That house? It wasn't just a building. It was the place where I had invested my love, my hopes, and my dreams for our future. It was where I thought we'd grow old together, but clearly, I was the only one who felt that way. And as I left, I couldn't help but laugh a little. Not out of humor, but because I knew something she didn't. Clara thought she had won, that she had all the cards in her hand. But what she didn't realize was that the deck she was holding wasn't even real. As I walked down the street, I thought about Robert. The man had always been a step ahead of everyone, and I had a feeling this time wouldn't be any different. There was no way he'd hand over $379 million to someone as reckless and entitled as Clara without putting safeguards in place. I didn't know the details yet, but I knew enough about Robert to trust that he had planned for this exact scenario. So, as Clara celebrated her supposed victory, I let her. Let her believe she had it all. Let her think she was free of me, of any responsibility, and on her way to a life of luxury. Because sooner or later, reality was going to hit her like a freight train. And when it did, I wasn't going to be there to pick up the pieces. No, this time, Clara was on her own. You'd think by now I'd have seen the cracks in the foundation of my marriage. But no. Hindsight is a cruel teacher, isn't it? Looking back, I realized the signs were always there. Little moments, subtle words, fleeting expressions that hinted at who Clara really was. I just didn't want to see it. Let me take you back to the beginning. When Clara and I first met, she had this charm, a magnetism that could draw anyone in. She was witty, elegant, and had a spark in her eyes that made you feel like the luckiest man alive if you caught her attention. And I fell for it, hook, line, and sinker. At the time, I was doing well for myself. I wasn't wealthy by any means, but I was comfortable. I had a solid job, a modest home, and a steady routine. Clara, on the other hand, was floundering. She was 30, unemployed, and still living off the occasional allowance her father sent her way. She tried a few things: freelance writing, some vague consulting work, even a short stint as a boutique manager, but nothing ever stuck. When we started dating, I didn't see her lack of ambition as a red flag. If anything, I saw it as an opportunity to support her, to help her find her footing. She had potential, I told myself. She just needed someone to believe in her. And for a while, it seemed like I was right. Clara was sweet, attentive, and seemed genuinely interested in building a life together. But there was one constant shadow in her life: her father, Robert. Robert was the polar opposite of Clara. He was disciplined, pragmatic, and incredibly successful. He had built his wealth from scratch, often working 16-hour days and making sacrifices Clara couldn't even begin to comprehend. And boy, did she resent him for it. "He never cared about me," she'd say, bitterness dripping from her words. "All he ever cared about was his stupid businesses." Even when I was a kid, it was always, "Clara, be responsible. Clara, work hard. Clara, save your money." Like I'm some kind of investment instead of his daughter. I didn't know how to respond to that. From where I stood, Robert seemed like a good man. He might have been strict, but he cared. He sent her money when she needed it, gave her advice, even if she didn't want it, and made sure she was always taken care of. But Clara only saw it as control, and she hated him for it. Despite her complaints, Robert was a looming presence in our relationship. He had this way of making you feel both impressed and intimidated. The few times we met, he was polite, even warm, but I could tell he was sizing me up, evaluating whether I was good enough for his daughter. "Take care of her," he told me once. "She needs stability." I promised him I would. I meant it too. But I don't think even Robert knew how deep Clara's entitlement ran. After we got married, it became clear that Clara had no interest in contributing to our life together. I worked long hours to pay the bills while she spent her days shopping, meeting friends for lunch, and scrolling through social media. Every now and then, she'd talk about getting a job or starting a project, but nothing ever came of it. At first, I brushed it off. "She's adjusting," I told myself. "Marriage is a big change. She'll find her rhythm eventually." But as months turned into years, I realized that wasn't going to happen. Still, I held on. I loved her, and I believed in us. I thought if I just gave her enough time and support, she'd figure things out. But deep down, I think I always knew the truth. Clara didn't want a partnership. She wanted a free ride. Things got worse as her resentment toward Robert grew. She'd complain endlessly about how he was hoarding wealth while she struggled to enjoy life. Never mind that she wasn't struggling, at least not financially. Between the allowance Robert still sent her and my steady income, Clara had everything she needed. But it was never enough. She'd talk about how things would change once Robert was gone. "He thinks he can control me with money," she'd say. "But when he's gone, I'll finally be free." It made me uneasy, hearing her talk like that. I chalked it up to frustration, but looking back, it was something more. Clara wasn't just waiting for her father to pass away. She was banking on it. I should have seen the warning signs then. The entitlement, the bitterness, the way she always blamed other people for her problems. It was all there, plain as day. But I ignored it, convinced that love was enough to make everything work. And so, I kept working, kept supporting her, kept believing in a future that, as it turns out, was never meant to be. You know, there's a specific kind of arrogance that money brings out in certain people, the kind that isn't even rooted in actual possession, but in the mere belief that the money is theirs. That was Clara after Robert's funeral. She acted like she'd already won the lottery, and in her mind, I was just the extra baggage she needed to unload before starting her real life. The change in her demeanor was instant. I mean, we were barely back from the funeral when Clara started planning her lavish future. It wasn't grief that filled the room those days. It was entitlement, pure and simple. She'd walk around the house with this air of self-importance, already talking about renovations, new cars, and vacations. "Once the estate clears, I'm hiring an interior designer, she said one evening, scrolling through photos of luxury villas on her phone. This house has so much potential, don't you think? The irony wasn't lost on me. This was the same woman who spent years complaining about how small and boring our house was. But now that she thought she was rich, it was suddenly a diamond in the rough. At first, I stayed quiet, letting her talk. Maybe it was morbid curiosity, watching her weave these elaborate dreams without a single clue about what was actually waiting for her. She'd flip through catalogs, muttering about marble countertops and crystal chandeliers, all while completely ignoring the fact that our marriage was falling apart right in front of her. And then it happened. The conversation that shattered whatever was left of our fragile relationship. We were sitting in the living room when Clara, without any preamble, dropped the bombshell. I think it's time we go our separate ways. I blinked, genuinely confused. Separate ways? What are you talking about? I want a divorce, she said, her tone so casual you'd think she was asking me to pass the salt. I leaned back, trying to process her words. Why? Why now? Clara sighed, as though the mere act of explaining herself was an inconvenience. Look, James, let's not make this harder than it has to be. I've been thinking about this for a while. Well, I don't need you anymore. You've been great, but let's be honest, you're not exactly indispensable. Indispensable. That word hit me like a punch to the gut. For years, I had been her rock. I paid the bills, cooked the meals, and cleaned up the messes, both literal and metaphorical. But now, because she thought she had a $379 million safety net, I was suddenly disposable? I could feel the anger bubbling up, but I forced myself to stay calm. So, this is it then? You think a pile of money is going to solve all your problems? Her eyes narrowed, and her voice took on a sharp edge. Don't act like this is some big betrayal. You've known for years that this marriage wasn't working. I deserve a chance to be happy, James. And frankly, I can't do that with you holding me back. Holding her back. That was rich coming from someone who had done absolutely nothing to support herself in all the years we'd been together. But I wasn't going to argue with her. Not anymore. All right, I said, keeping my tone even. If that's what you want, then fine. I'll sign the papers. She looked taken aback, like she expected me to beg or fight to change her mind. But why would I? Clara had made it perfectly clear that I was just a placeholder in her life, a temporary convenience until something better came along. As I signed the papers, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of relief. Yes, it hurt to see how little I meant to her, but at the same time, I knew I was better off without her. Before I handed the papers back, I paused and looked her in the eye. Just one piece of advice, Clara. Don't regret this later. LOL. Her lips curled into a sneer. Trust me, I won't. She didn't even wait for me to leave. As I walked out the door, I could hear her on the phone, talking excitedly about a luxury spa retreat she wanted to book to celebrate. Celebrating what, exactly? Losing a husband who would have walked through fire for her? Gambling her entire future on an inheritance she hadn't even read the fine print on? But I let her have her moment. Let her revel in her supposed victory. After all, what Clara didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that the $379 million she was banking on wasn't exactly what she thought it was. And soon enough, reality would come knocking, shattering her little fantasy into pieces. You know that moment in movies where the villain, standing on top of the world, suddenly realizes the ground beneath them isn't as solid as they thought? That's exactly what happened to Clara when she met with Robert's lawyer. By this point, Clara was on cloud nine. She'd strutted into the lawyer's office like a queen arriving at her coronation. She wore her best designer outfit, probably something she bought with my money before the divorce, and carried herself with this smug confidence, like the world owed her everything it had to offer. I wasn't there, of course, but I can imagine how it all went down. Clara probably didn't even bother with pleasantries. She wasn't interested in legal jargon or family formalities. She was there for one thing and one thing only. The $379 million she believed was her birthright. The lawyer, a man named Mr. Grayson, was an old friend of Robert's. He'd handled the family's legal matters for decades, and he wasn't one to suffer fools lightly. Clara, however, didn't realize this. Let's cut to the chase, Mr. Grayson. I can almost hear her saying, I know my father's estate was substantial, and as his only child, I assume the bulk of it belongs to me. So, if we could just finalize the paperwork, that would be great. Grayson, to his credit, didn't react. The man was a master of composure. Instead, he handed Clara a copy of the will. Have you read this document thoroughly, Mrs. Emerson? He asked. Clara waved a dismissive hand. I glanced at it. My father's estate is worth $379 million, correct? That's all I need to know. That's when it happened. Grayson chuckled. Not a polite chuckle, mind you. This was the kind of laughter you'd expect from someone who knows a secret that's about to change your life forever. Clara froze. What's so funny? She demanded, her voice tinged with irritation. Grayson leaned back in his chair, his eyes twinkling with a mix of amusement and pity. Mrs. Emerson, I suggest you take a closer look at the terms of the will. The estate is indeed worth $379 million, but there are conditions. Conditions? Clara's confidence began to waver. Yes, Grayson said, opening the will to a specific page. Your father, as you know, was a meticulous man. He believed in hard work and responsibility. As such, he outlined a series of requirements that must be met before you can access the full inheritance. What kind of requirements? Clara asked, her voice rising. Grayson explained calmly, as though he'd done this countless times before. To access the funds, you must meet the following conditions: secure full-time employment, complete a financial management course, and maintain both for a minimum of 5 years. Only then will the trust be fully unlocked. Clara's face must have drained of all color at that moment. You're joking, she said. That's ridiculous. I'm his daughter. I shouldn't have to earn what's rightfully mine. Grayson didn't flinch. Your father was quite clear on this matter. He believed it was important for you to develop the skills necessary to manage such a large sum of money. He wanted to ensure you wouldn't squander it. The room must have gone silent then, save for Clara's shallow breathing. All her grand plans, renovations, vacations, luxury cars, were slipping through her fingers like sand. And what if I don't meet these conditions? She asked, desperation creeping into her voice. Grayson closed the will with a quiet thud. If you fail to meet the conditions within 5 years, the trust will be dissolved, and the entire estate will be donated to charity. Charity? Clara practically screamed. You're telling me I could lose everything? Grayson nodded. That's correct. Clara was stunned. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. In her mind, the inheritance was hers, no strings attached. The idea that she'd have to work for it, after years of avoiding any real responsibility, was unthinkable. But the final blow was yet to come. Grayson leaned forward, his expression softening just slightly. There's one more thing, he said. Your father also allocated a portion of the estate, 20%, to be exact, to James. If Clara was pale before, she was now as white as a sheet. James? My ex-husband? Why would he get anything? Your father appreciated James' care and respect, particularly during his final years, Grayson explained. He believed James demonstrated the values he hoped to see in you. Clara couldn't speak. She had come into that office expecting to leave as a millionaire, only to find herself saddled with a to-do list and a fraction of what she thought she deserved. As for James, well, that's me. I wasn't surprised when Grayson called to let me know about the 20%. I thanked him and told him to give Clara my regards. After all, I warned her not to regret this later. I have to admit, when I got the call from Mr. Grayson, Robert's lawyer, I already had a pretty good idea of what had happened in his office. I could practically hear Clara's screeches through the phone line, even though I wasn't there. But hearing Grayson lay it all out for me, piece by piece, was satisfying. Not because I enjoy seeing people suffer, okay, maybe a little, but because it was the ultimate validation. Everything Robert had said, everything Clara had ignored, was coming back to bite her. Let's rewind for a moment. Robert wasn't just a businessman. He was a strategist. The man didn't leave anything to chance, especially not his $379 million estate. He once told me over a cup of coffee, James, money is like fire. It can warm you if you respect it, or it can burn you if you don't. I didn't realize then how much weight those words carried. Now, Clara? She treated money like it was her birthright, not something she had to earn or respect. She assumed her inheritance was a golden parachute that would whisk her away to a life of luxury without effort. And that's where Robert's brilliance shone through. He didn't just leave her $379 million. He left her a challenge, and a brutal one at that. Grayson explained the details to me during our call. "Your ex-wife didn't read the will, did she?" he asked, amusement dripping from his tone. "Not a chance," I replied. "She probably skimmed the first page and assumed she hit the jackpot." Grayson chuckled. "Well, she's in for a rude awakening. The trust fund is locked until she meets the conditions outlined by your father-in-law. Full-time employment, financial management training, and maintaining both for 5 years." I let out a low whistle. 5 years? That's going to feel like 5 decades for Clara. "Exactly," Grayson said. Robert believed that wealth without discipline is a recipe for disaster. He wanted her to understand the value of hard work and responsibility before gaining access to such a significant amount of money. It was genius, really. Robert knew his daughter better than anyone, and he'd crafted a plan that would either force her to grow up or ensure his money went somewhere it could do real good, charity. But Grayson wasn't done. "There's one more thing you should know," he said. "Oh? What's that?" "Robert left you a portion of the estate as well. 20%, to be exact." I almost dropped the phone. 20%? Are you serious? "Quite serious. Robert valued the respect and care you showed him, especially in his final years. He wanted to ensure you were recognized for that." I didn't know what to say. On one hand, I was grateful. On the other, I couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. This wasn't my money. It was Robert's legacy. But then again, he'd made his wishes clear, and I wasn't about to argue with a dead man's wisdom. As I processed this information, my mind wandered to Clara. She must have been losing her mind. For her, the conditions of the trust fund weren't just inconvenient, they were catastrophic. Clara had spent her entire life avoiding responsibility. Now, if she wanted access to the fortune she'd been banking on, she'd have to do the one thing she despised, work. And that wasn't all. The fact that I, her useless ex-husband, had been granted 20% of the estate was the ultimate insult. Robert might as well have reached out from the grave and said, "Grow up, Clara. Learn from someone who understands the value of hard work." I couldn't help but chuckle at the irony. Clara had spent years complaining about Robert's strictness, calling him stingy and controlling. But in the end, his discipline was what made him successful, and his wisdom ensured his wealth wouldn't be squandered. Now, here's the kicker. The trust fund wasn't just a lesson for Clara. It was a testament to Robert's character, his belief in accountability, and his refusal to let his fortune ruin the people he cared about. I hung up the phone feeling a strange mix of vindication and closure. Clara had always seen Robert as an obstacle, someone who stood between her and the life she thought she deserved. But now, she was facing the harsh reality that he was the only one who truly understood her potential, and the only one who was willing to push her toward it. As for me, I wasn't going to gloat. Okay, maybe I'd enjoy the thought of her trying to figure out how to hold down a job for 5 years. But mostly, I felt free. Free from Clara's entitlement, free from her constant criticism, and free to move on with my life. And the $40,000 I'd eventually receive from Robert's will? That wasn't just money, it was a reminder. A reminder that integrity, respect, and hard work matter. I'll admit, part of me wished I could have been a fly on the wall when the truth hit Clara like a freight train. The Clara I knew didn't handle disappointment well. She had always been someone who avoided responsibility and thrived on entitlement, and now she was facing a reality she couldn't manipulate her way out of. After learning about the conditions in Robert's will, Clara's world must have felt like it was collapsing around her. I could imagine her sitting across from Mr. Grayson, her face pale, her hands shaking, and her voice rising in that panicked tone she used whenever things didn't go her way. "What do you mean I have to work? That's absurd." I can hear her saying, "I'm his daughter. That money belongs to me." Grayson, ever calm and professional, likely responded with something like, "Mrs. Emerson, your father made his intentions very clear. He wanted to ensure his wealth would be used responsibly. These conditions are non-negotiable. For someone like Clara, who had spent her life avoiding anything resembling hard work, this must have felt like a cruel joke. She had built up this fantasy in her head, a fantasy where she was free to indulge every whim without consequence. But now, that fantasy was crumbling, leaving her with nothing but frustration and regret. When Grayson revealed that I'd been given 20% of the estate, I could practically see Clara's blood boiling. The very idea that I, the useless ex-husband she had discarded without a second thought, was deemed worthy of her father's respect must have been unbearable for her. "What does he get 20% for?" she probably demanded. "He's not even part of this family anymore." Grayson, unbothered, likely reminded her of the respect I had shown Robert during his final years, a respect Clara herself had never given him. That must have stung. And the best part? She couldn't do a thing about it. The will was ironclad, meticulously crafted to prevent any legal challenges. Clara had no choice but to accept the terms, no matter how unfair they seemed to her. But the real blow came later, after the meeting. Clara's arrogance had been stripped away, leaving her with nothing but the harsh reality of her situation. She was jobless, divorced, and now faced with the daunting task of meeting the conditions of the trust fund. I'm sure she spent days pacing around the house, trying to figure out her next move. She probably thought about contesting the will, but deep down, she knew it was futile. Robert's lawyer would have anticipated every possible argument, and Clara didn't have the resources or the energy to fight a losing battle. At some point, regret must have started creeping in. Clara had burned every bridge she had, believing the $379 million would make her untouchable. Now, she was left with nothing but a list of conditions she wasn't remotely prepared to meet. And let's not forget the humiliation. Clara had spent years mocking Robert for his discipline, calling him stingy and out of touch. Now, she was being forced to embrace the very values she had spent her life rejecting. It was poetic justice, really. I imagine Clara sat alone in that big house, staring at the trust fund paperwork, wondering how everything had gone so wrong. She probably thought back to our marriage, to the life we had built together, and realized that maybe, just maybe, she had underestimated me. Of course, she'd never admit it. Clara was too proud for that. But the signs of her regret were clear enough. The desperate texts she sent me, the half-hearted attempts to check in after the divorce, those were all the proof I needed. I didn't respond to her messages. What was the point? Clara had made her choice, and now she was living with the consequences. I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel a little satisfaction knowing she was finally experiencing what it meant to take responsibility for her actions. For once in her life, Clara was being held accountable, and there was no one left to bail her out. Meanwhile, I was moving forward, free from Clara's entitlement, free from her constant complaints, and free to rebuild my life on my own terms. As for Clara, I have no doubt she's still struggling to come to terms with her new reality. Maybe she's trying to find a job. Maybe she's taking the financial management course her father required. Or maybe she's just sitting in that house, wallowing in regret and wondering how she let it all slip through her fingers. Whatever she's doing, one thing is certain. She'll never forget the day her fantasies came crashing down, leaving her with nothing but the bitter taste of regret. You know, looking back, the strangest thing is how come I felt. I just walked out of a marriage that had been falling apart for years, left behind a house filled with empty promises, and now I was hearing that my ex-wife, Clara, had pretty much detonated her entire future. And yet, I wasn't angry or bitter. I was relieved. The truth is, the divorce wasn't just an ending. It was a beginning. For the first time in years, I wasn't weighed down by Clara's entitlement, her constant complaints, or her ever-growing list of unrealistic expectations. I was free to focus on myself, on what I wanted, without having to clean up someone else's mess. But let's rewind a bit. After I heard from Mr. Grayson about the will, I couldn't help but reflect on everything that had led up to this point. Robert, my late father-in-law, had always been a man of discipline and principle. He didn't throw money around or indulge in unnecessary luxuries, and while Clara saw that as stinginess, I saw it as wisdom. Robert once told me, "James, People who inherit wealth without earning it never respect it. It's like handing them fire. They'll either let it go out or burn themselves with it. At the time, I thought he was just making conversation, but now I realized he had been preparing me for this very moment. Clara, on the other hand, had spent her life chasing the illusion of wealth without ever understanding its value. She thought money would solve all her problems, but she didn't realize that money without purpose is nothing more than numbers in a bank account. The irony wasn't lost on me. Clara had mocked me for years, calling me boring and unambitious because I believed in working hard and living within my means. And yet, here I was, holding steady, while she was flailing in the aftermath of her own arrogance. I wasn't gloating, okay, maybe I was a little, but mostly, I felt validated. All the years I spent trying to support Clara, to encourage her to take responsibility for her life, weren't wasted after all. Robert had seen what I saw in her, and he'd put safeguards in place to make sure his legacy wasn't squandered. And then there was the 20% inheritance Robert left me. At first, I didn't know how to feel about it. Part of me thought I didn't deserve it. After all, it was Robert's money, not mine. But another part of me realized it wasn't just about the money. It was about the respect Robert had for me, for the way I treated him and his values. That inheritance wasn't just a financial gift. It was a recognition of the bond we had shared. I decided to use the money wisely. I wasn't going to blow it on flashy cars or expensive vacations. Instead, I invested it in my future. I put some of it into my savings, used a portion to start my own business, and donated a chunk to a charity Robert had supported in his lifetime. It felt like the right thing to do, like a way to honor his memory. As for Clara, well, I heard bits and pieces about her life through mutual acquaintances. She wasn't doing great, to put it mildly. The conditions of the trust fund were proving to be more than she could handle. She tried to find a job, but quickly realized that a lifetime of avoiding responsibility doesn't exactly prepare you for the workforce. From what I heard, she took the financial management course her father required, but even that was a struggle. Clara had never been one for discipline, and trying to force herself into a structured environment was like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. And yet, I couldn't bring myself to feel sorry for her. She'd made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. The same arrogance that had driven her to demand a divorce was now the very thing holding her back. Meanwhile, I was thriving. Free from Clara's constant negativity, I found myself with a renewed sense of purpose. My career took off, my business began to grow, and I even reconnected with old friends who drifted away during the chaos of my marriage. For the first time in years, I felt like myself again. And you know what the best part was? The quiet. No more arguments, no more passive-aggressive comments, no more walking on eggshells to avoid triggering one of Clara's tantrums. Just peace. Occasionally, I'd think about Robert and the lessons he'd taught me, not just through his words, but through his actions. He'd shown me the importance of discipline, integrity, and respect, and those lessons had become the foundation of my new life. So, while Clara was busy trying to figure out how to meet the trust fund's conditions, I was busy building something real, something meaningful. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. It didn't take long for Clara's downfall to begin. Honestly, I'd be lying if I said I didn't see it coming. You can't spend your entire life coasting on other people's efforts and expect to suddenly succeed when the safety net disappears. The conditions of Robert's will were like a reality check she never wanted but desperately needed. From what I heard, her first challenge was finding a job. For someone who had never held a stable position in her life, this was a monumental task. Clara, the same woman who once sneered at my 9-to-5 job as unimaginative, was now scouring job boards and sending out resumes. The irony was almost poetic, but her arrogance, even in the face of adversity, made things worse. Instead of humbling herself and starting small, Clara aimed for positions she had no qualifications for: executive roles, senior management, anything that sounded prestigious. When the inevitable rejection emails came flooding in, she was baffled. "What do they mean I'm not qualified?" she probably muttered, glaring at her laptop screen. "I'm Robert Emerson's daughter." The entitlement that had been her shield all her life was now her biggest obstacle. Employers weren't interested in her family name. They wanted experience, skills, and a strong work ethic, none of which Clara possessed. Eventually, she lowered her expectations and applied for entry-level positions, but even those were a struggle. She lacked the basic discipline required to succeed in any role. Clara wasn't used to taking orders or following through on tasks. She'd spent her life delegating, avoiding, and blaming others when things went wrong. Then came the financial management course, another condition of the trust fund. I heard through the grapevine that Clara approached it with the same disdain she had for work. To her, it was just another hoop to jump through, a box to check so she could get her hands on the money. But the course wasn't just about showing up. It required effort, focus, and an understanding of concepts she had no interest in learning. She failed the first module, and the second, and the third. Each failure chipped away at the confidence she had once worn like armor. For the first time, Clara was facing a world that didn't bend to her will, and it was breaking her. Her lifestyle began to crumble, too. Without access to the $379 million she thought was hers, Clara had to rely on what little money she had left. The expensive spa treatments, shopping sprees, and fancy dinners that once defined her life were replaced with budgeting apps and meal prep. She even sold off a few of her designer handbags to make ends meet. I can't imagine how humiliating that must have been for her. Clara, the self-proclaimed queen of luxury, reduced to clipping coupons and shopping in discount stores. But the worst part, from what I understand, was the isolation. Clara had burned so many bridges in her pursuit of wealth and independence that when things started falling apart, she had no one to turn to. Her so-called friends, the ones who had cheered her on when she divorced me, vanished the moment her money ran out. It's funny how quickly people disappear when you're no longer useful to them. Clara learned that the hard way. Meanwhile, the clock was ticking. The trust fund conditions gave her 5 years to secure a job, complete the financial course, and maintain both consistently. But each failure, each misstep, made the goal seem further and further out of reach. I heard she tried to contest the will at one point, claiming the conditions were unfair. Of course, the case didn't go anywhere. Robert had been meticulous in crafting the will, and there was no legal loophole for Clara to exploit. She was stuck, and she knew it. Every now and then, I'd hear snippets about her from mutual acquaintances. "She's struggling," they'd say. "She's not doing well." I never asked for details. I didn't need to. Clara's downfall wasn't something I wanted to gloat over. It was just a natural consequence of the choices she had made. Still, there was a part of me that hoped she'd learn something from all this. Maybe the struggle would force her to grow up, to finally take responsibility for her life. But deep down, I knew better. Clara had spent so long blaming everyone else for her problems that I doubted she even knew how to look in the mirror and see the truth. By the end of the first year, the cracks in her life were fully exposed. She was jobless, broke, and alone, clinging to the faint hope that she might somehow turn things around before the 5-year deadline. But if you ask me, the real tragedy wasn't that Clara had failed to meet the conditions of the trust fund. It was that she had failed to see the opportunity in front of her. Robert's will wasn't just about money. It was about growth, responsibility, and redemption. It was a chance for Clara to prove to herself and to the world that she was more than just a spoiled, entitled heiress. Unfortunately, Clara wasn't ready to take that chance. And by the time she realized it, it was already too late. While Clara was stumbling through the wreckage of her life, I was finally starting to rebuild mine. Walking away from her and that toxic marriage had been the best decision I'd ever made. It was as though a weight had been lifted, and I could finally see the path ahead of me clearly. Robert's unexpected 20% inheritance gave me a sense of security I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't the amount that mattered, it was what it symbolized. Robert's acknowledgement of my efforts and values meant more than any dollar figure, and I wasn't going to squander it. I invested wisely, putting some of the money into starting my own consulting business. It wasn't flashy, but it was something I had always wanted to do. I spent years honing my skills in sales and management, and now I was finally working for myself. Watching my business grow was deeply fulfilling in a way I hadn't experienced in a long time. My personal life blossomed, too. Without Clara's negativity dragging me down, I found myself reconnecting with old friends, and forming new relationships. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe, like I was living, not just surviving. Meanwhile, Clara's life continued to spiral. She had exhausted her options. The trust fund's conditions proved insurmountable, and each failure seemed to tighten the noose around her aspirations. By the end of the second year, her attempts to secure a job had dwindled to nothing. Employers didn't want someone with no experience and an entitled attitude, and Clara wasn't willing to start at the bottom. The financial management course? That was a disaster, too. Clara's disdain for discipline meant she never took it seriously, and she failed multiple times before finally giving up. The countdown to the 5-year deadline was moving faster than she realized, and with every passing day, her chances of accessing the trust fund faded further into the distance. By year 3, her financial situation had deteriorated significantly. The money she once thought would last forever was gone, spent on trying to maintain a lifestyle she could no longer afford. The big house, the designer clothes, the spa treatments, all of it disappeared. From what I heard, she ended up moving into a small apartment, barely scraping by on what little she had left. Her social circle had evaporated, too. The friends who had celebrated her independence after the divorce were nowhere to be found. It turns out they weren't interested in Clara without the promise of lavish dinners and shopping trips. Alone and isolated, she had no one to turn to. I'd hear snippets about her occasionally, how she was struggling, how she'd become a shadow of the woman she once was. I didn't go looking for these updates, but people love to talk. "You dodged a bullet with that one," a former colleague said to me once. "She's really hit rock bottom." I nodded, offering a polite smile, but I didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I would. By then, Clara wasn't even a part of my life anymore, just a distant memory of a chapter I'd long since closed. As the 5-year deadline approached, the inevitable happened. Clara failed to meet the conditions of the trust, and the $379 million was forfeited. The money went to charity, just as Robert had planned. Clara, the woman who had built her life on the assumption that wealth would always be within her grasp, was left with nothing. I imagine that moment must have been crushing for her. All the dreams she'd had, all the plans she'd made, gone in an instant. She'd spent years blaming others for her problems, but now there was no one left to blame. As for me, life was good. My business was thriving, and I had found a sense of purpose that had been missing for years. The lessons I learned from Robert about discipline, respect, and the value of hard work had become the foundation of my success. One day, I received a letter. It was from Clara. The handwriting was shaky, almost unrecognizable, but the message was clear. She was asking for help, not money, but advice. "I don't know what to do anymore," she wrote. "I've made so many mistakes. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I don't know who else to turn to." I stared at the letter for a long time before putting it away. Clara had burned every bridge, including ours. I wasn't angry at her anymore. I'd moved past that, but I wasn't going to step back into her chaos. The truth is, Clara's downfall wasn't about the money or the trust fund. It was about her refusal to take responsibility for her life. She had every opportunity to grow, to change, to build something meaningful, but she chose to cling to her entitlement instead. And me? I chose to move forward. I rented a modest condo, invested my inheritance wisely, and focused on building a life I could be proud of. The $40,000 I received from Robert's estate remains untouched in my account, a reminder of the man who taught me that wealth is meaningless without integrity. Clara may have turned pale when she heard the truth about the will, but I walked away with something far more valuable: freedom.